and we all did it. This was an assault on the Constitution, an assault on Congress. It was a felonious assault. It was an attempt to murder the Congress and our processes to elect our President of the United States. It is the political equivalent of shooting somebody on Fifth Avenue and getting away with it. And somebody needs to stand up to that, and the 25th Amendment is one way to do it, where the Republicans can purge themselves of their own creation who has damaged this country. I ask us to pass this resolution, bring this country together, and get rid of this cancer. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Does the gentleman reserve?
Yes, I do.
The gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Wisconsin.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
Thank you. This is an absurd resolution, callously politicizing an unpredictable tragedy last week. We all know that President Trump called for a peaceful and patriotic march. I must have attended a half dozen Trump rallies in the past year, and they've always been peaceful, wholesome events, typical of the thousands of peaceful protesters who remained away from the Capitol last week. I never would have expected this in a million years. This is a horrible event, but not like the Black Lives Matter Antifa events that went on day after day and city after city, with prominent Democrats fanning the flames by mischaracterizing police shootings or apparently encouraging bail for lawbreakers. Less than 2 years ago, a member of this body encouraged harassment of Trump officers at restaurants, gas stations, or department stores. And what happened? She was rewarded with the chairmanship of an A committee. Even in last week's riots, the Speaker tried to preposterously racialize them, which can only lead to trouble, maybe violence. Everybody back home says we ought to get along. Is this the way to start things? It's time to get back to dealing with the people's business, dealing with the cancer culture that's beginning. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland.
I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson.
The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For 244 years, America has stood as the world's bellwether of democracy. Last week, the world saw America at perhaps her lowest moment. It was crazy. We all took the same oath when we swore to protect this country from enemies both foreign and domestic. And now, with a domestic enemy having arisen that is crazy, only the Vice President has the power to invoke the 25th Amendment and protect this country from this domestic enemy. The 25th Amendment was written for this moment, and if not now, when would its use ever be appropriate? Vice President Pence, you have an opportunity to put country before self by implementing the 25th Amendment. Please muster the courage to protect America from maniacal behavior that threatens the very foundations of our democracy. Stop the violence, Mr. Vice President. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Shabbat.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What happened last Wednesday at the Capitol never should have happened. The actions of those who attempted to breach the Capitol building and then ultimately did are inexcusable. Lawlessness and violence are never acceptable, whichever side of the political divide one may fall. Those who broke the law should be and will be identified and prosecuted. In the aftermath of last week's tragic events, most Americans continue to be saddened, angry, and wanting answers. And they are looking to us to provide a positive example of how to bring our nation back together. Unfortunately, if what we're doing this evening is any indication, Congress might not be up to the task. The Democrats' attempt to invoke the 25th Amendment and to once again impeach President Trump a week before he'll be leaving office anyway are, in my opinion, misguided. The push to encourage the Vice President to invoke the 25th Amendment is especially ill-advised. The Constitution is clear that the role for Congress to play under the 25th Amendment is to decide if the powers provided thereunder have been properly invoked in the event of a dispute between the President and Vice President or the majority of the Cabinet. In other words, we are to serve as judges under the 25th Amendment, not instigators. By encouraging the Vice President to take action, Supporters of this resolution are abandoning our constitutional role, which could have a significant legal consequence down the road. And even more importantly, rather than help to heal a divided nation, the Democrats' effort will likely drive us even further apart. Instead, Mr. Speaker, we should be turning our attention towards uniting the American people. It's time for us to tone down the political rhetoric, to work together, to solve the problems that face our nation. It's time for us to put aside our differences and find common ground. After all, we're all Americans. I yield back.
Expired. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. Mr. Raskin,
I
you're
yield 1 minute
recognized.
to Mr. Swalwell from California.
Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, on January
How much
6th,
time did you yield, Mr. Raskin?
1 minute.
1 minute, yes.
Mr. Speaker, on January 6th, Donald Trump incited radicalized terrorists to attack the Capitol to stop the counting of electoral ballots. Donald Trump won't protect life and cannot uphold our Constitution, so we must do so today. It's time for our country to unite, but unity in a national crisis starts with accountability, and that starts here in the People's House. So let's unite against the violence incited by Donald Trump to stop a peaceful transition of power and unite for the safety of all Americans. Let's unite against a president whose hate speech led to the death of a law enforcement officer and unite for the cops and military who bravely defended the Capitol. Let's unite against Donald Trump, who inspired terrorists to carry a Confederate flag into this Capitol, display a noose, and desecrate the People's House. And let's unite for the custodial staff, largely people of color, who cleaned up after those white supremacists because they still believe in this democracy, as imperfect as it was that day. The most essential function of a president is to protect life and defend liberty. Donald Trump has failed to do that and is failing to do that, so Vice President Pence must invoke the 25th Amendment. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire how much time each side has?
Gentleman from Ohio has 16 and 1/2 minutes remaining. From Maryland has 16 and 3/4 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stubbe.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would be remiss if I didn't address the atrocities occurring right here on the House floor today. A week ago, this building was attacked, and instead of working with Republicans to attempt to prevent that from ever happening again, the Speaker and her Democratic colleagues think an appropriate response is to prevent members from exercising their Second Amendment constitutional rights in the very place that wasn't secure a week ago. This attack didn't come from the inside, it came from the outside. And to respond by restricting members' Second Amendment rights in the very institution that is supposed to uphold those rights is appalling. Take note, America. This is what you have to look forward to in a Joe Biden administration. If they can do it right here in the People's House, they will attempt to do it across the country. The plain language of the 25th Amendment is abundantly clear. And although I am an attorney, you don't have to be an attorney to understand that the Vice President is the principle required to invoke the amendment. The beginning of Section 4 states, whenever the VP and a majority of either principal officers of the executive departments or of such other body as Congress may provide by law declare the President's unable to discharge. You must have the Vice President invoking this, and you don't. The Vice President has been clear. He is unwilling to invoke the 25th Amendment. It's not Congress's role to override him. It doesn't state in the amendment that Congress makes that determination. The Vice President does. But my Democratic colleagues will stop at nothing to remove this president even a week before his term expires. The plain reading of the 25th Amendment demonstrates that this is the wrong approach. An understanding of last week's events demonstrates this is the wrong approach. And a consideration of the political tactics that we have seen in the recent days, months, and years tells you that this is a disingenuous approach at best and 100% politically motivated. I was elected in 2018, and my entire congressional career has been consumed by impeaching or removing President Trump. And after the Russia collusion hoax, and then a phone call to the Ukrainian president, and then a failed impeachment attempt that resulted in an acquittal, here we are, a little more than a week away from a new president being sworn in, attempting this travesty both to the Constitution and to America as a whole. This is dangerous, unconstitutional, and does nothing to heal this country and move this country forward.
The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from Maryland.
I yield 1 minute to Representative Garcia from Texas.
The gentlelady from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand before the House floor today alarmed that just days ago, a sitting president stirred up a deadly attack on our U.S. Capitol. I join my colleagues in calling on Vice President Pence to activate Section 4 of the 25th Amendment. It has become abundantly clear that this president has threatened our democratic system, has interfered with the peaceful transition of power, and has endangered an equal branch of government. The President of the United States is unhinged, unfit, and unstable, or as we say in my district, está loco el hombre, to the point where he's willing to tear our democracy down unless he prevails in his quest to overturn the election that he clearly lost. The actions taken by this president and those who enable him show that he is unfit to uphold the duties of his office. For the sake of our nation's security, this president must be swiftly removed. Mr. Speaker, democracy is a gift one generation gives to the next. We must defend it.
Expired.
Thank you, and I yield back the
Gentlelady yields
remainder of my
back.
time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield a minute and a half to the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. Boebert.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to oppose yet another Democrat witch hunt. We should take Democrats at their word when they say never let a good crisis go to waste. While Section 4 of the 25th Amendment has never been used, a plain reading of the text coupled with the context of its ratification contemplates a very different scenario from the one we are currently in. It envisions a president's disability resulting in serious illness to injury. To suggest it should be used in a different context violates the very intent of the 25th Amendment. To be clear, this resolution is a divisive political stunt which would have no force of law and is a waste of our time. Mr. Speaker, this resolution is a clear overreach, as invoking the 25th Amendment is not something Congress can initiate, and this must be initiated by the executive branch. Democrats talk about unity, but clearly that's just talk, as their actions only further divide us. Their hypocrisy is on full display this week with this 25th Amendment stunt, articles of impeachment, censure bills, and other efforts to try to punish Republicans for false accusations of inciting the type of violence they have so frequently and transparently supported in the past. Throughout 2020, we witnessed Democrats welcome, encourage, and even normalize violence. For them, violent riots were effective in advancing their agenda.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from Maryland.
Nice job, Lauren. Yeah, we reserve.
Speaker, very quickly, the gentlelady whom I've not had the pleasure to meet yet confuses disability and incapacity. Franklin D. Roosevelt was in a wheelchair. He had a disability, and he was one of our greatest presidents. President Lincoln, according to historians, suffered from depression, but he was one of our greatest presidents. Incapacity is different. Incapacity is demonstrated by President Trump's complete, total inability to conform his conduct to the rule of law and the Constitution. I yield 1 minute to Representative McBath.
Gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. McBath, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I came to Congress to make sure that no parent ever experienced the pain that I have. I came to Congress to fight for children who've practiced active shooter drills at the same time that they're simply learning how to read, for families who've lost loved ones to gun violence, and for communities that will never, ever be the same. Last Wednesday, members of this body hid from insurrectionists behind barricades and locked doors. Staffers of this hallowed institution text to their loved ones. They're banging on the doors outside, "I love you." And citizens of this nation watched in real time as rioters stormed the Capitol through shattered windows and broken glass. The result of the president's rhetoric has left 5 Americans dead. Our response to anyone who seeks to overthrow the will of the people must be unwavering and resolute. I didn't come to Congress to do this, but President Trump's actions warrant his immediate removal from office. And I yield back the balance of my
Gentlelady yields
time.
back. The gentleman from Maryland reserves.
Yes.
The gentleman from Ohio.
Yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Texas, Mr.
The
Fowler.
gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak against this resolution. I'm at a loss. I can't believe the very first time that I have the honor and privilege to address this august chamber is to talk about removing the President of the United States because he held a permitted, legal, and peaceful rally. It's nothing but a wasteful political grandstand. Let's make no mistake. January 6th was a dark day in our esteemed nation's history. It was a dark and sad day. On the afternoon of January 6th, a mob breached our sacred Capitol. Donald Trump didn't. A mob destroyed property and vandalized historic treasures and ran amok on these grounds. But Donald Trump didn't. A mob committed despicable and evil acts of violence against fellow Americans. But Donald Trump didn't. In fact, Donald Trump urged, and in fact demanded, peaceful dissent and nothing more. Our colleagues on the other side of the aisle want us to unnecessarily remove a president when we're measuring the time he has left, not in years, months, weeks, or days. He's got 182 hours left in office. You don't achieve unity by simply saying it. You achieve unity through actions. This resolution accomplishes not unity, but rather is a waste of time and fosters further divisiveness. And I'm going to vote no on this resolution. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland.
I yield to Representative Neguse for 1 minute.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I had planned remarks here, but I have to respond to my colleague. His words are simply too much to bear. He talks a lot about the mob and culpability. Who summoned the mob? Who encouraged the mob? Who incited the mob? You know as well as I do that the president did. I stood here 6 days ago in this exact same spot, and I quoted Lincoln's admonition that we shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. And less than 10 minutes later, a violent mob breached the Capitol, the first breach of this hallowed building, the citadel of liberty since the War of 1812. The Congress must respond. Our undertaking here is not about politics. It is a matter of conscience. I support the distinguished gentleman from Maryland's resolution. I pray that the Vice President will honor his oath, reconsider, and invoke the provisions of the 25th Amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
Yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, they may be calling on the Vice President, but based on his letter, he's not answering. Everybody in this country knows that they wanted to impeach President Trump on his first day in office. And it looks like they're going to want to impeach him on his last day, too. But all he did in the middle was rescue our economy, rebuild our military, reform the VA, and reduce America's involvement in foreign wars. Now, I join the bipartisan caucus condemning the violence that we saw at our Capitol, but the hypocrisy is just downright disorienting. President Trump called for protests that would be peaceful and patriotic. He got labeled a national security threat. Yet the gentlelady from California can call on her supporters to get physical and in the faces of Republicans, and she gets the chairmanship of the Financial Services Committee. Republican members of Congress utilized a process contemplated in the Constitution to offer an objection, and we were labeled seditionists. Democrat members of Congress raised funds for groups attacking our police, burning our cities, destroying our businesses, establishing autonomous zones, and they were celebrated as justice warriors. Wednesday, they called for unity, democracy, and healing. Now, just days later, seeking power and political advantage, the Democrats have reverted to the mean. They've gone back to their natural state, the party of impeachment, removal, and division. They're about to have unified control of the government. Maybe they'd use this time to preview an agenda for the American people. Now, the last 2 times the 25th Amendment was invoked, it was to facilitate a colonoscopy. Now they're using it to facilitate a transition to Joe Biden. How weird. Why? I'd call it virtue signaling, but there is no virtue in it. This removal effort isn't for America. It's for them, for their ability to showcase and wield power. And we see the power of cancellation and removal on full display in America today. Forbes magazine has called for White House officials to be shamed and unemployable. ABC News has called for the cleansing of the Trump movement. I don't know what that means, but talking about cleansing our fellow human beings sure is scary. Big tech has driven consumers and conservatives off of monopolistic platforms, and then when we created our own platform, Parler, it was nuked from the internet altogether. The gentlelady from New York was booted from a Harvard advisory board because she took an adverse position on electors that had been taken by every single member of the Congressional Black Caucus in 2001. Cancellations for some, celebrations for others, for doing the exact same thing. The President of the United States can't tweet or post on Facebook, but we know from Project Veritas that the principal counsel for PBS can call for the government to steal children from Republicans and throw Molotov cocktails at the White House. We should allow America to heal before America is lost, but that is not happening today. I'd request 30 more seconds.
The gentleman is given 30 additional seconds.
The deal now is House Democrats just want in on the act. That's the purpose of the resolution today. They want to show you that they can still tear things down. I guess over the next 2 years, we'll see if they're capable of building anything or anyone up. This is a deeply unpopular impeachment. The public wishes we were here dealing with coronavirus, not the virus of Trump hatred that you seem to have found no vaccine for. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Ohio reserves. The gentleman from Maryland is now recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I heard one of our colleagues say it was the fault of the mob, not Donald Trump. But who summoned the mob? Who created the mob? Who assembled it? Well, you don't have to trust us if you don't like what you call Democrat members. We do prefer Democratic members for the new ones, but how about this? Listen to the chair of your own conference. The chair of the Republican conference, Liz Cheney, said, the President of the United States summoned this mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. Everything that followed was his doing. None of this would have happened without the President. So you can hate the Democrat members all you want. That is the chair of the Republican conference, Mr. Speaker. I yield 1 minute to Ms. Maloney.
New York, Ms. Maloney, the chair of the Government Oversight Committee, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like all of us in this chamber, the Vice President and the Cabinet swore in their oaths of office to protect and defend the Constitution from enemies, foreign and domestic. Now they must fulfill that oath by invoking the 25th Amendment. Donald Trump's reckless actions on and leading to January 6th underscore that he is a clear and present danger to our democratic traditions. He repeatedly and blatantly lied, spouting baseless claims of a stolen election and fraud. He called on his supporters to come to D.C. on January 6th, a day which he said, I quote, will be wild, end quote, and willfully incited an armed and deadly insurrection against another branch of our government. President Trump must be held accountable, and we must return to the peaceful transfer of power. I urge a yes vote and yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, we would reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland.
I yield to Mr. Clyburn for 1 minute.
The gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Clyburn, the majority whip, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of this resolution. In recent days, it has become indisputable that this president is unable to uphold his oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. On the contrary, he seems only capable of attacking the Constitution. Never before has the president sought to overturn a fair and secure election, threatening state officials to manufacture fraudulent votes. Never before has the president incited mob violence, to block certification of his opponent's victory. Never before has the president refused to condemn and demand the cessation of an attack on our country. The devastating bruises on our nation's soul can only begin to heal by removing the weapon used to bludgeon us. The Vice President must invoke the 25th Amendment to immediately remove power from this dangerous president. And if he doesn't, we must vote to impeach. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio, Gentleman reserves. Mr. Raskin, you may proceed.
I yield 1 minute to Mr. Krishnamurthy from Illinois.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I'm so glad our friends have changed their mantra from stop the steal to start to heal. But in order to heal, you have to take strong medicine, and that medicine happens to be the truth. My friends, the truth is, unfortunately, this president is no longer fit to serve. We cannot trust this president to protect American democracy after he encouraged his supporters to, quote unquote, fight like hell in storming the Capitol. We cannot trust him to protect American safety after he told these violent seditionists that, quote, we love you, you're very special, close quote. We cannot trust this president to tell right from wrong, even today, when he said that his remarks on January 6th were, quote unquote, totally appropriate. Mr. Speaker, we cannot trust this president to protect us when he instigated a mob that tried to kill us. I yield back.
Yields back. The gentleman reserves.
Reserve.
Mr. Jordan, you're recognized.
We reserve.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Maryland.
I yield 45 seconds to Mr. Soto from Florida.
Gentleman is recognized for 45
seconds.
45 seconds. The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I was in the gallery right behind us when the Capitol was breached. Then domestic terrorists breached the rotunda. I heard the loud sounds of gunshots through this sacred chamber. And my last images were brave Capitol Police, guns drawn to protect us. This was the first armed insurrection in over 200 years. And who incited this violent insurrection? Donald J. Trump. Our resolution states these protests were encouraged by him. He urged millions of his followers to come and stop the steal, which is a lie. And let's say this now for the record and for the ages. Joe Biden won. And for this high crime nearly ripping our country aback, we should be removing him by the 25th Amendment, or he should be impeached.
Back from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
I think we'll reserve one
Gentleman
more.
reserves. Gentleman from Maryland.
I yield to the distinguished Congress lady from California, Ms. Waters.
Gentleman from California, Ms. Waters, the chair of the Committee on Financial Services.
How much time?
How much time?
How much time?
Are you yielding, Mr. Raskin?
1 minute.
Gentleman yields to the gentlelady. 1 minute. Gentlelady is now recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, on January 6, 2021, domestic terrorists the president has empowered for years stormed the Capitol, desecrated the People's House, and threatened the lives of the Speaker, Vice President, and countless other members and staff. None of us will ever forget that day. The invasion of the Capitol was not only foreseeable, it was inevitable because of the many years the president has spent fanning the flames of hatred and racism in our country. The facts are clear. The president rallied his supporters at the White House and then sent them to the Capitol to disrupt our democracy and overturn an election. I won't spend another second explaining why Donald Trump should have long ago been removed from office. Donald Trump showed us who he was from the very beginning. Too many people turned a blind eye. And last Wednesday, Our country paid the price. I yield back the balance of
He
my
yields
time.
back.
Go. I'm gonna go.
Sir, how much time do both sides have remaining, please?
The gentleman from Maryland is advised that he has 7 3/4 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Ohio has 8 minutes remaining.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves.
Mr. Speaker, I yield
Gentleman from Ohio.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I might use. This past year, government told Americans you can't go to church, you can't go to work, you can't go to school. 1 hour ago, Democrats told Republicans new rules for the House. Today, you can say anything you want about the president. No rule on decorum, no rule about attacking personality. They can say anything they want, and we've seen that they've done that. Today on the floor, got to wear a mask. If your mask comes below your nose, you're going to get fined. And in order to come in here and debate and represent, constitutionally represent your constituents, the 750,000 people we all get the privilege of serving, you had to walk through a metal detector. And they did all those changes with less than 40 minutes of debate. And tomorrow, they're going to impeach a president who is leaving office in 8 days. 8 days before there will be a peaceful transfer of power, just like there has been every other time in American history. But they're going to do impeachment. They're going to do it again. They've been obsessed with it. It is truly an obsession. People on the Democrat side started calling for impeachment the day President Trump was inaugurated. They attacked him before he even won the first election, before he won in 2016. They attacked him that summer when they started their investigation. This is scary where this goes, because this is more than about impeaching the President of the United States. This is about canceling the President and canceling all the people you guys disagree with. That's what scares me more than anything. We have seen it play out over the past several days. I never thought I'd see the things that we are now witnessing. And I don't know where it ends. But I tell you what, it should scare us all. And I said this in the Judiciary Committee, and the gentleman from Maryland will remember this. The cancel culture doesn't just go after conservatives and Republicans. It won't just stop there. It'll come for us all. That's what's frightening. And I hope you all recognize that. And at some point, we can unite and actually do things that help those folks back home that we all get the privilege of representing. Reserve our time, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you. The cancel culture of violent white supremacy tried to cancel out all of our lives last Wednesday. I yield 1 minute to Congressman Panetta.
Gentleman from California, Mr.
Speaker, on January 7th at 4 in the morning, I was right outside those doors where 14 hours earlier, a rioter was shot as she violently tried to enter this chamber. It was in that early morning and at that location that I had a brief conversation with Vice-President Mike Pence right after we finished certifying the Electoral College. I was proud that we did our job that morning, despite the violence we experienced earlier that day. But I knew that was not enough because of the seditious actions by President Trump before that riot and his inaction during that riot. So I said to the Vice President, it's up to you to keep us safe. Tonight, with the President still in office, I'm beyond asking. I'm legislating to compel the Vice President to convene the Cabinet to conclude that the President is not just unable, but clearly he is unwilling and unworthy to discharge his duties. So through this legislation, I ask my colleagues to call on the Vice President to invoke the 25th Amendment, yes, to keep us safe and keep this nation secure. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves.
Yes.
Gentleman from Ohio.
Recognize the gentlelady from New Mexico, Ms. Harrell, for 1 minute.
Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to the misuse of the 25th Amendment. To preserve separation of powers, the authors of the 25th Amendment correctly intended Section 4 to be initiated by the Vice President, not by the request of Congress. Process concerns aside, the fact is removing the President from office will not heal our nation. It will not bridge our partisan divides, give Americans hope, or bring us together. It will only make things worse. With just days away until President Trump leaves the White House and just days into our new Congress, we have more important things to do. We should be working to hold big tech accountable. We should be working to help families and small businesses get through the pandemic. We should be working on jobs, on infrastructure, on energy, and all the other issues our constituents sent us here to address. I am appalled by the violence that took place here last week. Those who assaulted police officers and forced their way into these hallowed halls are responsible for their criminal acts and must be brought to justice. I cannot support the the 25th Amendment. But I'm also tired of the double standard, the double talk, and the double trouble that we've brought upon the American people, and we have got to stand for our Constitution. This is our Nehemiah moment, and we better take for granted. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Ohio.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Mr. Raskin.
I yield to Dr. Bera, 45 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for 45 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, just over a week ago, we all took the oath of office, all of us, Democrats and Republicans, and part of that oath was to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. It's quite clear what happened last Wednesday, a domestic attack on our government, a domestic attack on this body. Republicans have already acknowledged who instigated the attack. The lead instigator was the President of the United States. Now, it is our solemn duty to uphold that oath, to defend our Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. There is nothing more solemn than what we have to do. If my colleagues don't want to instigate the 25th Amendment, that's one mechanism. We'll give you an opportunity tomorrow to impeach the President. That's our duty. That's what we have to do. Let's uphold our oath. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
We reserve, Mr.
Gentleman
Speaker.
reserves. Gentleman from Maryland.
I yield 45 seconds to Mr. Gomez.
45 seconds is yielded to Mr. Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're here tonight because a violent mob incited by the President of the United States, based on a lie, laid siege to Congress to overturn a presidential election. But we have to ask ourselves, what would have happened if that mob succeeded? Why stop at one election? Why not two? Why not make Donald Trump president for life? Thank God that did not happen and they did not succeed. However, even after that terrible day of January 6, 2021, Donald Trump is still using the lie of a stolen election to turn American against American for his own selfish ends. I believe even with only a few days left in office that Donald Trump is still a danger to our republic and must be removed immediately. And as a fact, and as an example, today the Joint Chiefs of Staff issued a statement support.
Seconds to the gentleman.
Gentleman is granted an additional 10 seconds.
And today the Joint Chiefs of Staff issued a statement reaffirming their devotion to the rule of law and affirming that Joe Biden will be the 46th President of the United States. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Raskin, you reserve. Gentleman from Ohio.
We reserve.
Gentleman reserves.
I yield 1 minute to Ms. Velasquez from New York.
Gentlelady from New York, the chair of the Committee on Small Business, is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of this resolution. Impressionable children are watching all of this, and they are learning from us. I believe we each have a moral obligation to exercise good judgment and model the behavior we hope they will emulate. That was Betsy DeVos. As I am sure is the case with many of you, it has deeply troubled me in a way that I simply cannot set aside. That was Elaine Chao. Mr. Speaker, these were members of the President's own cabinet who bore the sacred responsibility of taking action when the President is clearly unfit for office. But their words are all talk, and if they will not act, then Congress will. So today, we are giving the Vice President 24 hours to do right by the American people. Remove this President from office, and if you do not, the House will impeach. I yield back.
He yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Back to you, Mr. Raskin.
I yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff.
The gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, is recognized for 1 minute.
6 days ago, I was standing right here, fulfilling my constitutional duties to certify the election, And 6 days ago, Donald Trump was on the Mall, whipping a mob into a frenzy with false claims of stolen elections and unconstitutional schemes. It was a big lie, the same big lie he had been telling for weeks. He told the mob, "We are going to the Capitol and to fight like hell," and they did. 5 died, many more were hurt, and we were seconds away from something much worse. My colleagues, upholding our oath, the Constitution, and our democracy means recognizing that every second that Donald Trump is president, the nation is at risk. We have the power to do something about it. Mike Pence must do his duty, invoke the 25th, and if he won't, we will move with urgency to do ours and impeach Donald Trump again. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Reserves.
From
Maryland, the gentleman from Maryland is advised that he has 2 3/4 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Ohio is advised that he has 4 3/4 minutes remaining. The gentleman from Ohio.
I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Davidson.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized. 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, I can't say it better than the Vice President said it himself. Vice President Mike Pence said, "Last week I did not yield to pressure to exert power beyond my constitutional authority to determine the outcome of the election. And I will not now yield to efforts in the House of Representatives to play political games at a time so serious in the life of our nation." I ask unanimous consent to submit this to the record.
Without objection.
I thank the Vice President for his excellent leadership, for his professionalism, and frankly for his faithfulness to our Constitution. Not only would it be an abuse of the 25th Amendment for Mike Pence to invoke it to make a political statement, it's clearly not our role in Congress to do what we're doing here tonight, or is proposed to do by the majority. Speaker Pelosi claims that President Trump incited the mob that attacked the Capitol at a rally. Well, as Mr. McClintock spoke earlier, he read the president's statement. He encouraged people to come peacefully and patriotically. The Washington Post is reporting something that I would hope that our chairman of the Intel Committee would know about. The FBI report warned of war at the Capitol the day before the attack on our Capitol. I'm curious how someone proposes that the president incited the mob at a rally the day before the rally. I ask unanimous consent the article be submitted to the record.
Without objection.
You know, others are reporting a timeline that has the breach out of sync as well, but that highlights the important. There's far too little that we know about this attack on our Capitol. Here's what we do know. No one has defended this attack on our Capitol. On our contrary, we are missing, willfully missing, in my opinion, a moment of extreme unity in our nation, just like was willfully done earlier this year. At a time of great political and partisan division, even seething anger, one thing all Americans seem to agree on: these attacks were wrong. The president condemned them. He discouraged violence, not just on January 6th, but on other days throughout the year, as he talked about law and order, as he talked about something that we finally seem to agree on, that there is a clear distinction between the Constitution's First Amendment protection of the right to assemble peaceably and riots. Criminal, unlawful riots. There's a distinction between rioters and protesters, and frankly, it took us months to agree on that as a body in Congress, but the people of the United States of America agreed to it. They understood it. So I encourage my colleagues across the political spectrum, the members of Congress here gathered together today and tomorrow, to stand united and move forward with the agreement our country has. This was wrong, and it was not.
The gentleman from Ohio.
30, additional.
Gentleman from Ohio reserves.
Reserve.
Gentleman from Maryland.
3/4 of a minute to Mr. Espaillat from New York.
Gentleman from New York, Mr. Espaillat, is recognized for 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've all known for a while now, but this past week, it has become undeniably clear Donald J. Trump is unfit to the Secretary of Agriculture, Defense, Commerce, and Education and Transportation. He is unfit. To the Secretaries of Human Services, Homeland Security, Housing, Interior, and Labor, he is unfit. To the Attorney General, he is unfit. To the Vice President of the United States, he summons his goons. They shed their hoods and came with their racist Confederate flag to assassinate him, to assassinate the Vice President. He is unfit. Invoke the 25th Amendment. If not, we will impeach him tomorrow. And I yield back.
Goes back. The gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Ohio reserves. Mr. Raskin.
I'm yielding 45 seconds to Mr. Davis of Illinois.
The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Danny Davis, recognized for 45 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After listening to all that I've heard this evening, I still have the faith and belief that we can come together as a unit. I was reading my Bible the other day and saw that it said, "Come and let us reason together. Otherwise, we shall all be destroyed by the edge of the sword." I say to my colleagues, let's reason together. You cannot erase truth with a lie. You cannot pretend that what has happened did not happen. Yes, we ought to have a president, but it's time for this one to go. I urge passage of this resolution and agree wholeheartedly.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio.
We reserve.
He reserves. Mr. Raskin.
I yield 45 seconds to the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Thompson.
Mr. Thompson is recognized for 45 seconds.
The President of the United States incited an attack against our democracy. Violence. On the 6th of January, he unleashed a mob. Knew what he was doing, and now 5 people are dead. The president can initiate removal of the president who's unfit. I urge a yes vote on this resolution, and I urge a yes on
Reserves? Do you reserve?
But we have one last speaker, is the gentleman.
Ohio is recognized.
I thought you had one last speaker.
But
it's not what America's about. And we condemn this violence. We commend the men and women of the Capitol Police for their bravery, and we mourn the loss of those lives that were taken last week. Republicans have been consistent. We condemned the violence last summer. We condemned the violence last week. Democrats have been consistent about one thing: their endless quest to overturn the 2016 election. I mean, they're still trying to overturn the 2016 election after the 2020 election. This has been an obsession with you guys. In the first round, the first impeachment, based on the anonymous whistleblower, that the country couldn't, you tried to remove President Trump from office based on a guy that we weren't even allowed to see, know who he or she was, couldn't cross-examine him, anonymous whistleblower with no firsthand knowledge, who was biased against the president and who worked, interestingly enough, for Joe Biden. So continuing this quest is not, as has been said so many times on the floor tonight, not what the country needs. Not what the country needs, particularly after the year the country has lived through. So I hope we will not vote for this, that this thing will go down, and I urge my colleagues to vote against the resolution sponsored by the gentleman from Maryland. With that, we yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Raskin.
And Mr. Speaker, I yield the remainder of my time, which I think is 47 seconds, to the distinguished chairman of the Agriculture Committee, Mr. Scott of Georgia.
The gentleman from Georgia is allowed 37 seconds to 30 seconds to close.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Speaker, but what we're discussing tonight isn't about us. It's about the will of the American people. They're brokenhearted, they're crying, they're discouraged, and the overwhelming number of American people want this president out of office now. This is why we got to do it now. We got to heal the wounds. The longer that president is over there, the more we're tearing the heart and soul out of the American people. Let us do it now.
The gentleman's time has expired. All time for debate has now expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 38, the previous question is ordered on the resolution and on the preamble as amended. The question is on adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The resolution is agreed to.
Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Section 3 of the House Resolution 8, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device.
For what purposes?
What purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Baird of Indiana, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Baird will vote no on H-Res 21.
Maryland seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Alma Adams of North Carolina, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Adams will vote yes on H-Res 21.
Purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Peters, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Peters will vote yes on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Mr. Liu, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Liu will vote yes on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Mr. Lowenthal, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lowenthal will vote yes on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Mr. Blumenauer, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Blumenauer will vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Vela pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Vela will vote aye on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
As a member designated by Ms. Eshoo, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Eshoo will vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Virginia seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member designated by Mr. McEachin pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. McEachin will vote yes on H-Res 21. And as the member designated by Ms. Porter pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Porter will vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
As the member designated by Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Chairwoman Johnson will vote yea on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Chairman Jerry Nadler pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Chairman Nadler will vote yea on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Congressman Brendan Boyle pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Congressman Boyle will vote yea on H-Res 21.
Purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Bergman pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Bergman will vote no on H-Res 21. Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Lamborn pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lamborn will vote no on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Maine seek recognition?
As a member designated by Ms. Custer, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Custer will vote yea on H-Res 21.
Gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Bishop of Georgia, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Bishop will vote yes. He will vote yes on H-Res 21. Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Thompson of Mississippi, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Thompson will vote yes on H-Res 21. Finally, Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Richmond of Louisiana, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Richmond will vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Frankel pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Frankel will vote yes on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Ms. Bonamici pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Bonamici will vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by, let's see, who am I? Pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Fletcher will vote aye on H-Res 21.
Illinois. Ready? For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Illinois seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Carson pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Carson will vote yes on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Mr. Rush pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Rush will vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Jayapal pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House Ms. Jayapal will vote aye on House Resolution 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Grijalva pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Grijalva will vote yes on H-Res 21. And as the member designated by Ms. Presley pursuant to H-Res 1, I inform the House that Ms. Presley will vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Fleischman of Tennessee pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Fleischman will vote nay on H-Res 21. As the member designated by Mr. Desjardins of Tennessee pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Desjardins will vote nay on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Bonnie Watson Coleman pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Watson Coleman will vote yes on H-Res 21. And as the member designated by Mr. Albio Series pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Series will vote yes on H-Res 21. And as the member designated by Mr. Bill Pascrell pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Pascrell will vote yes on H-Res 21. And finally, Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Paul Tonko pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Tonko will vote yes on H-Res 21. Thank you.
Purpose does the gentleman from Kansas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. LaTurner of Kansas pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. LaTurner will vote nay on House Resolution 21.
Purpose, does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member designated by Ms. Strickland of Washington, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Ms. Strickland will vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
As a member designated by Mr. Gonzalez of Ohio, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Gonzalez of Ohio will vote no on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Lawson of Florida, 5th Congressional District, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Lawson will vote yea on H Resolution 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Connecticut seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Adam Smith of Washington State pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Smith will vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Congressmember Napolitano, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Congressmember Napolitano will vote yes on H-Res 21. And Mr. Speaker, as member designated by Congressmember Costa, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Congressmember Costa will also vote yes on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Nebraska seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Bill Rackus of Florida, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Bill Rackus will vote nay on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Mondaire Jones of New York, pursuant to H-Res 8, I inform the House that Mr. Jones will vote yea on H-Res 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member designated by Mr. Doyle of Pennsylvania, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I hereby inform the House that Mr. Doyle will vote yes on House Resolution 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
As a member designated by Representative Kirkpatrick, pursuant to H.R. 8, I inform the House that Representative Kirkpatrick will vote aye on H.R. 21. As the member designated by Representative Cardenas, pursuant to H.R. 8, I inform the House that Representative Cardenas will vote aye on H.R. 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
As the member designated by Mr. Schneider pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. Schneider will vote yes on H.Res. 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Wild pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Wild will vote yes on H.Res. 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Connecticut seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Wilson pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Ms. Wilson will vote yes on H.Res. 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts seek recognition?
Good evening, Mr. Speaker. As the member designated by the Honorable Mr. James Langevin of Rhode Island, pursuant to House Resolution 8, I'd like to inform the House that Mr. Langevin will vote yes on House Resolution 21 as amended, a resolution calling on Vice-President Michael R. Pence to convene and mobilize the principal office of the Executive Department of the Cabinet to activate Section 4 of the 25th Amendment and to declare President Donald J. Trump incapable of executing the duties of his office and to immediately exercise powers as acting president. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
As the member designated by Congressman Jerry McNerney pursuant to H.Res. 8, I inform the House that Mr. McNerney will vote yes on H.Res. 21.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Titus of Nevada, pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Titus will vote yes on HRES 21.
Purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Young of Alaska pursuant to House Resolution 8, I inform the House that Mr. Young will vote nay on adoption of House Resolution 21. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Kansas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Lager Fernandez pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Lager Fernandez will vote aye on HRES 21.
Purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Ms. Walorski pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Walorski will vote nay on HRES 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mrs. Dingle pursuant to HRES 8, I will inform the House that Mrs. Dingle will vote yea on HRES 21. As the member designated by Ms. Lee of Nevada pursuant to HRES 8, I will inform the House that Ms. Lee will vote yea on HRES 21. As the member designated by Ms. Capter pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Capter will vote yea on HRES 21. As the member designated by Ms. Axney pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Ms. Axney will vote yea on HRES 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a member designated by Mr. Buchanan of the state of Florida pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Buchanan will vote nay on HRES 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. Hastings of Florida pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Hastings will vote yea on HRES 21. And Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Payne of New Jersey, pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Payne will also vote yea on HRES 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as the member designated by Mr. Deutsch of Florida pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. Deutsch will vote yes on HRES 21.
purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
As the member designated by Ms. Ocasio-Cortez pursuant to HRES 8, I will inform the House that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez will vote yes on HRES 21.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, as a member designated by Mr. DeSaulnier pursuant to HRES 8, I inform the House that Mr. DeSaulnier will vote yes on HRES 21.
On this vote, the yeas are 223, the nays are 205. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Section 5A1B of House Resolution 8, the House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.